all I am is a man. I want the world in my hands. I hate the beach, but I stand in California with my toes in the sand. Use the sleeves on my sweater. Let's have an adventure. Head in the clouds, but my gravity's centered. Touch my neck and I'll touch yours. You and those little high-waisted shorts. I wanna think about one love, two mouths, one love, one house, no shirt, no blouse, just us. You find out nothing I wouldn't wanna tell you about. No, can't be too cold for you here and now. So let me hold both your hands in the holes. It's too cold for you here and both your hands in the holes of my sweater.
Hey, what's up? The votes are being counted in Iowa, New Hampshire, and beyond. And has it been a coronation for the imperial emperor of the regressive movement, Mr. Bernie Sanders? Not really. And it's not just about the Iowa app. There's a new person in town to hate, and that person is Pete Buttigieg.
If luck be a lady, then I'ma stroke her till she leak. You could call her Adele, bitch, I be rolling in the deep. And it's back to the hustle, my whole culture I must lead. Militant rebel, Geronimo, head on the beat. Go load up them choppers, partner, we bout to go to war. Cheated by the system, yeah, we a bunch of Al Gores. Chip on my shoulder, still fresh as an Altoid. They be stagnant, I keep it rolling like I was alloy. Above the rim, nutso, Kylie Watson, fuck coach, first class swagger, plush flow. I roll a plane, what the fuck I need a Dutch for?
He's done surprisingly well, and I do find it interesting that there's so many octogenarians on the stage that Pete, at 37, he comes off looking like a non-octogenarian. And I think that's important because the role of president is highly symbolic. You know, they're only 1/3 of our government. And yes, it's an important job, obviously, in terms of policy and leadership, but a lot of it is optics. And if you're putting up someone who's infirm, limp, shall we say, old, decrepit, just looking like the crypt keeper. What was it that Aid Skrillex said? You're old.
Fucking old ass piece of shit. You're fucking old. Old.
I mean, I think there is something to be said for looking like you are physically not about to drop dead before you take on the most difficult job in the world. So that brings us to Pete Buttigieg. Mayor Pete. At first, he was delightful because he was pretty smart, he spoke pretty well, and he was a gay. Still is a gay. But because his popularity got a little bit too strong for the regressives' liking, as in he is now challenging Bernie Sanders, he had to go. And what were they going to focus on? Well, predictably, his gayness went out the window. They're like, who gives a shit? First gay president? Who cares? We have an agenda to push over. And his white male status has risen to the forefront, as in it's a problem that he's a white and a male. Also, the fact that he's the only guy who served in the military, although it's brought up from time to time, it's not really highlighted. No, instead, they are on a campaign to disparage this man, to wreck him. They're freaking out. It is all hands on deck. Let us smear Pete Buttigieg. Holy shit. They have made fun of every aspect about him, including his fans. Remember, his fans came up with that goofy-ass dance to that song, and it looked and came across as white, in a bad way. As in, this is bad dancing.
All right, friends, there is a deeply troubling new trend sweeping the internet. You know what I'm talking about. The Mayor Pete dance videos they were trending yesterday. Like, oh my God. So for those of you who don't know what the dance is all about, take a listen. All right, so basically it's the most painful thing that's ever happened, right? And they just keep doing it.
Pete Buttigieg's campaign has been infiltrated with dancing mobs. Now, I'm kidding about the infiltration part. These are actual supporters of Pete Buttigieg, and they're getting a lot of heat online by people mocking them because of the fact that they're doing these choreographed dances at various Buttigieg campaign events. I'm gonna go ahead and show you an example of what that looks like without the sound. Let's keep our mics up because I don't wanna play copyrighted music on this show. But I'll tell you a little more about what's going on. So there it is, they're having fun. You know, lots of white people, I get it. That's one of the things that gets pointed out quite a bit on social media.
But if you go to the Young Turks, check this out. Look at this. This is their recent run of propaganda. And by the way, remember the Young Turks? Oh, we're a news station, and we just give you the facts. Really? Which facts? Well, apparently these are the facts you need to know. In the last couple weeks, they have tried to bury Pete Buttigieg, and really all it is they're preaching to the choir. So their regressive shit audience, they were never gonna vote for Pete anyway, he's way too moderate. But here it is, Biden releases devastating Buttigieg ad. So they're willing to mirror a Biden ad, who they hate Biden too, just so long as it's ripping on Pete. Buttigieg gets busted doing something slimy. That's nice clickbait. Bernie destroys Pete Buttigieg during New Hampshire debate. Pete Buttigieg hiring Goldman Sachs bankers. Bernie calls out Pete Buttigieg. Buttigieg asked a very uncomfortable question during the Democratic debate. Ooh, we're gonna look at that one. Uncovered video of Pete Buttigieg at a Tea Party event. Ooh, it's found footage, guys. What did Pete say? Pete Buttigieg declares himself victorious after Iowa caucuses. And they're saying, oh, how dare he? He didn't win. He didn't win the popular vote. Cringy Pete Buttigieg dance craze. Pete Buttigieg is a lying motherfucker. Goes viral on Twitter. A shocking Pete Buttigieg story the media is ignoring. So this is the kind of middle-of-the-road, fair, balanced, honest, integrity-laced coverage that the Young Turks have towards, you know, a fellow Democrat, Pete Buttigieg. Keeping it real, just totally fair, nothing to see here.
Then let me suggest Pete Buttigieg for all who want it. That video was too spicy for TikTok, by the way. They took it down. I'm being censored, ladies.
Do I like Pete Buttigieg? No, I'm on record, as you know, I'm a Yang man. And I'm fully aware that Yang doesn't really have a chance this election cycle, but I am more than happy with the way he has introduced himself to the world stage. I feel like his ideas have incredible merit, and from top to bottom, we're not just talking UBI. You go look at his platform, the guy is sensible, he is smart, I trust his judgment. I have thoroughly vetted Yang, and I am down with this dude. He pulls in a big audience, and I think he's by far and away the best that the Democrats could offer. And of course, typically, the Democrats will not be offering him. So, okay. Stay tuned, though, because he's a young man, and he's going to come back, and he's not going anywhere. So this is just the beginning for Mr. Andrew Yang. And if you look here, I took a poll, and it's a series of questions on who do you agree with. And for me, it was Andrew Yang. But look at who's to the right of him. A distant second, I grant you. It's Mayor Pete. Now, what do I think of Mayor Pete? I have not heard him give an entire speech. And my impression of him is primarily from the debates, and he seems like a slick, overly polished politician. Yes, he looks like a mannequin, looks like the dude from the Mad magazine. Kind of a creepy vibe, and when he talks, it's eloquent, it's thought out, but it seems rehearsed and staged and empty and hollow. I don't feel like he's passionate about anything he's saying, and he's evasive, he's not very policy driven, so it's a lot of fluff and not a lot of substance. That's my general impression of Mayor Pete. But I'm not ignorant to the fact that everyone I hate hates him. And the enemy of my enemy is my friend. As you can see on this graph, who do I agree with the least? Bernie Sanders. So if you're going to say, if Yang is out, who am I supporting? Sanders or Pete? I mean, there are degrees of crazy here, people. It's a spectrum. Life, many times, is a spectrum. It's not a choice, good, bad. No, it's more good or less bad. That's what it comes down to. Now, if you are a Trump fan, then you should probably just sit tight because you have an incumbent president, and the Democrats are doing everything in their power to bungle this. And here's my point. I believe in political disagreement. I believe in honest disagreement, respectful disagreement. And I think it's really important, now that we're in the land of the internet, to begin to notice and value the difference between a dishonest disagreement and an honest disagreement. As in, are you straw-manning your opponent or steel-manning your opponent? Let's say you don't like Mayor Pete. Tons of reasons not to. But are you criticizing him on those reasons, or are you making up bullshit to smear him with? Now, the Young Turks obviously fail when faced with this challenge. They are trying to smear Pete Buttigieg on some frivolous bullshit that he has nothing to do with. We're going to dive into one of those, and we're going to talk about it. Because you might not like Mayor Pete, but you shouldn't not like him for the following reasons.
Since we're on the topic of Buttigieg, I do want to move on to a moment in the debate that was actually very surprising for a lot of people. The moderators challenged Pete Buttigieg on something. Now, he doesn't have much of a record because, as I've mentioned before, he's a young, failed former mayor of a small town, South Bend, Indiana.
Wait, what? He's a young, failed former mayor? Yeah, he's trying to run for president, and he's doing a hell of a job. How is he a failed mayor? He became the mayor. He was a success. He wasn't fired. What are you talking about? Nice spin, nice framing.
And the reason why I say he's a failed mayor is because racial tensions in South Bend really exploded after he was elected as mayor.
Oh, blow me. So, okay, Pete Buttigieg is a failure because of racial tensions in South Bend, Indiana? Well, when he came into office, you have the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement, and you have all the hysteria, which is stoked up by race vultures like you. But apparently that's the fault of Pete Buttigieg? Yeah, Pete, why don't you solve racism? Solve the uprising and racist attitudes from the anti-white brigade within your city. Yeah, Pete, you didn't fix it all. Thanks, Obama. It's the same shit. It's like Mayor Pete, it's not his responsibility to solve race relations in South Bend. Nice, Anna.
One of his first actions was to attempt to fire the small town's first African-American police chief. And so he was asked.
Oh my God, he tried to fire the African-American police chief. Did you hear that? Well, then he must be racist. I mean, why would you fire a guy when he's African-American? What did Martin Luther King Jr. say? He said, and I'm paraphrasing, ask not what you're, no, that's somebody else. He said, I have a dream that one day we can judge people on the content of their melanin and not on the content of their character. Wasn't that it? I think it was something like that. Right, so let's forget what the black police chief did. Irrelevant. Why would I judge a guy based on his performance on the job? No, judge him on what color his skin is. Well, it turns out, Anna, that the dude was fired because he, surprise, surprise, was committing a crime. And the FBI was investigating the African-American police chief. By the way, the same police chief he hired. So no credit for hiring the dude, only blame for firing the dude. And I love how there's no discussion of the reasons he was fired. It's just, look at the optics, people, the optics. Pete, hey, Mayor Pete. Please explain why you fired the black police chief.
Another question from Valerie, from London Valerie. But first, I need to give it some background. Back in 2012, it was discovered that the police chief of South Bend, who was African American, had been taping phone conversations of senior police officers who were allegedly using racist language, in particularly racist language about him. You demoted the police chief. No action was taken against the officers in question. London Valerie wants to ask about this. She's a freshman at Harvard from San Antonio. Great. London?
Mayor, my question is straightforward. What are on the secret tapes regarding the demotions of South Bend's black police chief, Darrell Boykins?
So the answer is I don't know. And the reason I don't know is that these tape recordings were made in a way that may have violated the Federal Wiretap Act. That's a federal law that controls when you can and can't record people. And the allegation was that the police chief was using these recordings to try to figure out what was going on with internal rivalries with other police officers, and allegedly broke the Federal Wiretap Act when he did that. That's a law that's punishable by a term in prison. And so I'm not going to violate it, even though I want to know what's on those tapes like everybody else does. Right now, this is going through an incredibly long, frustrating, and expensive legal process that in the end will allow a judge to say whether or not the content of these recordings can be released, so we can figure out whether it's true or whether it's not true, that there's something on there that we need to be concerned about. The reason I demoted the chief was that I found out that he was the subject of a criminal investigation, not from him, but from the FBI, and it made it very hard for me to trust him as one of my own appointees. It was frustrating and painful too, though. He was the first African-American chief in our city's history, and one of the reasons I had asked him to serve in the first place in my administration was a great track record in community policing, which is a huge priority for us because we're a racially diverse community. And speaking of things you learn along the way, and in particular, lessons I learned the hard way as a mayor. One of the things I realized was that while I was absorbed in just making sure that we weren't tripping on any landmines related to laws about what you can and can't record, I was, frankly, a little bit slow to understand just how much anguish underlay the community's response to this. Because for people in the community, it wasn't just about whether we were right or wrong to be concerned about the Federal Wiretap Act. It was about whether communities of color could trust that police departments had their best interests at heart. And the more I learned about that, the more I realized that lifting the veil of mistrust between communities of color and our police department had to be one of my top priorities as mayor. It's why we instituted civil rights training and implicit bias training. It's why we implemented body-worn cameras for all of our officers. It's why we directed officers to make more foot patrols and get to know people in these neighborhoods, especially neighborhoods experiencing a lot of crime, not in an enforcement environment, but in a trust-building environment. And a number of other measures, including stepping up our efforts to recruit more minority recruits onto the department itself. Something I'm still not satisfied with what we've been able to do so far, so that there's more of that trust.
Right now, I think it's the police force, the last statistic I saw in 2018, it was 5% African-American, whereas the population is 26% African-American.
Yeah.
And the two police chiefs you hired subsequently, which some people in the community criticize you for, were both white.
And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, a lucid, concise, accurate description of why he had to fire this dude. A little bit problematic when your police chief is committing crimes. But overall, before we get back to Hooknose, the strategy that they are trying to go with is there are racial problems in South Bend, Indiana. Translation, bleeps are committing crime in South Bend, Indiana. And let's blame the white dude in charge of the city. That is the logic. This is the level of integrity that these people have. It doesn't make any sense. They will not spin this around and put Bernie on the same standard. So if Bernie becomes president and you have black crime somewhere in America, they're not going to say, hey, Bernie, you failed ex-senator. What are you doing? Why haven't you solved the black crime that you're in charge of now?
Mayor Buttigieg, under your leadership as mayor, a black resident in South Bend, Indiana was 4 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana possession than a white resident.
Okay. Before you ask why that is, that's not random. The cops don't wake up and go, hey, let's go arrest bleeps for marijuana and not anyone else. No, it's because bleeps commit more crime. I mean, okay, ladies and gentlemen, it is to a degree that we have to change our terminology about this problem. The problem is, it is very irritating for me to repeat the mantra. I've been saying this for a number of years now, and it should never have been, it should have been obvious. It should have been readily apparent for any serious adult human being to know that black people commit way more crimes. Not even a little more, a lot more. So this very narrowly formatted question, when it comes to this one particular drug, marijuana, blacks are arrested more than whites. How could that possibly be? Is racism the answer? Obviously, this is racism of the gaps, but the actual answer is blacks commit more crimes. Shall I say it again? Blacks commit more crimes. Hey, Matt Damon, blacks commit more crimes. Matt, blacks commit more crimes. Blacks commit more crimes. Blacks commit more crimes. Blacks commit more... Matt, you're not hearing me. Blacks commit more crimes. That's the answer. It's their fucking fault. It's not cops randomly having a crusade against the bleeps. By the way, half of those cops are cops of color. So your story falls apart. You don't live in a white supremacist nation. You're wasting all of our motherfucking time. Start taking ownership over your own behavior.
Now, that racial disparity is higher than the rest of the state. In fact, it's higher than the rest of the nation.
Oh, well, let me chime in there, Mrs. Reporter. Blacks are arrested for rape at this level, a level that is way higher than whites. Why is that? Hey, cops, are you arresting bleeps for rape because you're racist? No, it's because they got a phone call saying, I got raped. And they said, who raped you? And they said, a bleep. And they went, where is he? And they go, down at Popeyes. And they said, okay, we'll show up and arrest that motherfucker. That's what happened. So only talking about marijuana? Oh, that's so convenient. Do you want to talk robbery, assault, or murder? No, you don't. Shut your hole.
And that disparity increased in South Bend after you took office. When talking about the problem on national terms, you have called it, quote, evidence of systemic racism.
Evidence of systemic racism. Holy shit. Okay, before I was talking about terminology. So terminology is, this is not a minor error. This is not a few people making this mistake. This is a mass trend, and I'm calling it beyond mass delusion, beyond a moral panic, beyond white guilt. This is all coming up to a crescendo. This is the singularity of weakness. What we're dealing with is an epidemic of willful blindness that has swept across generations of human beings. They refuse to acknowledge that black people commit more crimes to an astonishing degree, even though the evidence is churned out daily. And if they cared to so much as look at any evidence from any stat, it would be abundantly clear to them. So this is the grandest of lies that we are sitting in, and we're being gaslit by billions of people. Wake up, people. You are comatose to the truth. I'm not asking you to take a red pill. You don't have to start watching Jared Taylor. I mean, you're not ready for that. But can we take anything that's slightly purple? Can I get a pink pill? Anything. Something leaning toward this side of the spectrum. Because it is absurd. It is fucking absurd. Pete knows this. She knows this. That's what's astonishing. I used to look at religious people talk, and I'm looking at grown-ups. Well, even when I was a kid, on Sunday, on my TV, I'd be watching like this religious world, and I didn't understand it. And I was thinking to myself, these people are grown-ups. I mean, I realize they're all enabling each other and confirming this lie between themselves, but surely someone is going to stand up and say, you know how there's no God? And this is like an invisible entity that there's no evidence for? Should we acknowledge that at some point? Should we take ourselves seriously? I mean, this is an insult to us and our people and our future. What are we doing here? But no, we're all supposed to sit around and go, no, the real problem is racism. That's the fuck. This has turned into a crusade of mine, and I'm spending multiple years of my adult life trying to explain to people that they are malignantly backward on this issue. Am I annoyed at the repetitiveness needed to bang this drum, to beat this horse? Yes, it's obvious. Have you been to a black community? Have you been there? Go talk to the police. Go talk to the victims. You don't care because you're a weak bitch. Now tell her, Pete.
But you were mayor for 8 years, so weren't you, in effect, the head of the system?
Yeah, Mayor Pete, were you not the grand wizard of the South Bend police force who were just randomly arresting bleeps because of racism?
And how do you explain that increase in black arrests under your leadership?
Well, the reality is, on my watch, drug arrests in South Bend were lower than the national average, and specifically to marijuana, lower than in Indiana.
He throws Indiana under the bus.
But there is no question that systemic racism has penetrated to every level of our system.
Oh. Okay, so he's no better. This is why I don't like the guy. Systemic racism has penetrated to every... What? No. So it's just mind-numbing. And, you know, part of the joy of being a free speaker, a free thinker, someone who is not constrained by any corporate interest online. None. So this is just purely from me, the authentic version of me. That's why I'm able to speak the truth to you. Like we're in a barber shop, like we're behind closed doors, smoking cigars, playing a little poker. That's why. But him, Pete, standing in front of a national audience, international, cameras rolling, and a black woman is asking him about racism, do you think he's going to push back and be like, ma'am, I think you're exaggerating. I think it's a myth, this notion that there's systemic racism. When you talk about black people being arrested, they're being arrested because they're committing crimes. You have no evidence that they're being arrested more because of the random racism of cops. It's not true. It's a story you're telling yourself because you don't know what else to do. The only thing you know is to be a victim, to be an oppressed, noble victim. And you give your side a pass, your people a pass, because you, milady, are the racist one. The rest of the sane world don't care who's committing crime, they're against crime and criminals. And if the numbers turn out the way the numbers turn out, guess what? Deal with it and stop trying to make excuses for your tribe. And by the way, why is that your tribe? We're supposed to all be Americans coexisting. What happened to diversity as our strength?
And my city was not immune. I took a lot of heat for discussing systemic racism with my own police department. But we've got to confront the fact that there is no escaping how this is part of all of our policies.
It's garbage. I mean, this is a typical garbage Mayor Pete statement. Our policies are responsible for what she's describing? What policy? I mean, it's insane. The laws are the laws get enforced. If you see a disparity in numbers, you cannot knee-jerk and be like, well, racism. I mean, what the fuck is that? So when bleeps commit 93% of interracial crime, there's a disparity in numbers? Is that because of racism, guys? Oh no, that's not? That's because of poverty or some shit? Give me a break. The double standards are everywhere.
Earlier, we were talking about opioids, and thankfully, America has come to a better understanding about the fact that opioid addiction is best understood as a medical problem. But there were a lot of people, including a lot
Put your hand down, Grandma.
of